For RPGs on home consoles in the first half of the 90s, we can't forget the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive also had their fair share of epic adventures. Now, I've played plenty of Phantasy Star and Shining Force, and I'm guessing you have too. So what else is there? Well, let's explore the console's library deeper for any overlooked titles, and also dip into some simulation and strategy games, which is a big blind spot in my usual genres I gravitate to. So let's begin and pull out one game per letter from A to Z. First up, A is for Arcus Odyssey, an isometric action RPG developed by Wolf Team and released for the Genesis in 1991, along with a version on the Sharp X68000 in Japan, and also eventually getting a port to the Super Famicom in 1993. Admittedly, this one is a dodgy first pick for this video, as it's very light on the RPG mechanics, and it's probably more comparable to hack-and-slash arcade games like Gauntlet or Gate of Doom. But hey, for this letter of the alphabet, it was either this or Aerobiz. Which is sick, actually. You should play that too. Anyways, you can pick from one of 4 different characters in single-player or 2-player co-op, each with different attacks and attributes, and you'll embark on a quest to stop the dark sorceress Castomina and return peace to the land of Arcus. The game is broken up into various acts, and you must crawl through maze-like levels full of monsters, magical treasures, and occasional NPCs to help you progress, sometimes even joining you as a buddy and upping your offensive capabilities. The character progression is otherwise quite straightforward, with some upgrades to your health or attack power, but you won't need to worry about grinding for experience points or anything. The action can get a bit frantic, as your screen's real estate can get cramped and some enemies may hit you before you have much time to react. But luckily, there are plenty of items scattered around to help you out, like healing potions, resurrection dolls, magical attacks, you know the drill. And you also have unlimited continues and a password system for making multiple attempts. This one's pretty tough, and perhaps on the shallow side, but it's a fun little adventure to quickly pick up and hack through. For the letter B, we're looking at Buck Rogers' Countdown to Doomsday. Originally released for various computer platforms in 1990 and ported to the Sega Genesis the following year. Developed by Strategic Simulations, which is a name you've probably seen on numerous Dungeons & Dragons computer titles, Buck Rogers certainly falls into that similar kind of style, even down to integrating AD&D tabletop mechanics. You can either create your party or use a pre-made one on the side of the New Earth organization, who upon starting the game immediately fall under attack by the Russo-American mercantile marines from Mars. Now, if you're more familiar with the computer versions, you might notice the Genesis port is stripped down quite a bit, using an isometric view instead of first person, has limited character race and class choices, an interface that uses more icons than text, and numerous other details. So to be fair, you might have a more complete experience elsewhere, but it is cool that a slightly simplified console version exists as an option. I can't say I've gotten very far in this one, but it could be worth a look if you're into this SSI style of RPG, or if you're a fan of the Buck Rogers franchise. Up next, we have Cadash, another action RPG that leans much heavier into action than RPG thanks to its arcade roots, with the original version released in arcades in 1990 by Taito, and with a port to the TurboGrafx in 1991, and eventually the Genesis in 1992. You and perhaps a player too can pick from a fighter or mage in a fairly generic rescue the princess kind of quest, with side-scrolling action platforming gameplay, bolstered by light RPG mechanics like gaining levels with experience points, collecting gold that can be used to buy better equipment in the game's villages, and talking to the population of the game's clue-doling NPCs. The Genesis port stands apart a bit in that it's lacking 2 of the other playable characters, the ninja and the priestess, and it altered a lot of other nuances of the gameplay, on top of having redone the sprites and utilizing a darker color palette. If I'm being honest, this might not be the best version of Cadash, despite it being the latest release, but regardless, this can still be a fun challenge to take on, especially in co-op play. But otherwise, maybe check out the arcade version, which can support 4 players, or at least the TG16 version, which has all 4 characters available, and I think it looks a little nicer. And D is for Dyna Brothers, a Japanese exclusive Mega Drive real-time strategy game putting you in command of an army of dinosaurs battling against invading space aliens. You must protect the egg, which is also your means of creating differing species of dinosaur units with their own unique abilities in offense, defense, or resource production. I can't entirely claim to know how to effectively play this game yet, but it seems like a very cute and straightforward little RTS that could get pretty interesting as the challenge increases. And it does have an English fan translation, which isn't 100% complete, but it's certainly enough to get some eggs hatching and dinos chomping. It has several different missions, difficulty settings, and even a hidden back mode which lets you play as the aliens instead. And if you want more, there was also a Dyna Brothers 2, and even a Dyna Brothers 2 Special, which was an expanded version only released on the Sega channel in Japan. And E is for Exile, with our next game, an action RPG developed by Telenet, and actually a remake of their game XZR2, which was released for Japanese computers. The XZR series has some notoriety in that its pretty wild plot has heavy elements of religion, war, and illicit drug use, and the first game even has you travel in time to assassinate the Soviet General Secretary and the President of the United States. Neat! XZR2 also has its fair share of craziness as you kill numerous religious deities during your quest to unite the world under one god and rescuing the head of a real Japanese sex cult along the way. XZR2 received ports to the Japanese Mega Drive and PC Engine CD in 1991, and localized versions of each would follow in 1992. And as you can guess, the spicier plot elements have been toned down, with all of the direct religious references removed, and the various narcotics you can use have been renamed. Now, the gameplay itself switches between a top-down traditional RPG-like exploration mode, where you can walk around, talk to NPCs, go shopping, and so on, and there's also a world map hub that you can use to go to different locations. Action takes place in a side-scrolling platformer view, where you can jump and slash your way through some often maze-like stages, all while gaining gold and experience points for killing enemies. It kind of feels like an unpolished East 3 or something like that, with some kind of janky controls and fairly harsh difficulty at times. All in all, this is a solid and intriguing piece of the series, if anything. Checking this one out made me more curious to play the unaltered originals. F is for Fatal Labyrinth, developed and published by Sega and first released in 1990, and is perhaps one of the earliest notable examples of a Japanese-developed roguelike game. You control a nameless hero venturing into the 30-floor labyrinth to recover a stolen holy goblet, or hopefully recover at least enough gold to have a fancy tombstone when you die. While the graphics may look like a traditional RPG, the game mechanics definitely follow in Rogue's footsteps, with turn-based actions, randomly generated floors, experimenting with unknown items and spells, searching for better gear, and permadeath. It's a straightforward but addictive gameplay loop, with successful runs requiring a healthy balance of skill and luck. Now, this is one I've randomly picked up and played over the years, and still to this date I have yet to reach the 30th floor, but something about it keeps me coming back for another try every once in a while. And if you dig this, the similar but less punishing Dragon Crystal also hit the Master System and Game Gear around this time and shares some of the same art assets. Or of course, don't forget Toe Jam and Earl, the funkiest roguelike of them all. Up next is Gemfire from Koei, a prolific developer of strategy sims, and this will not be the last time we see another title from them on today's list. Gemfire's first release was on the Famicom in 1991, but was gradually localized and ported to several different computers and consoles, including this Genesis release from 1992. You can pick from a handful of scenarios and control one of 6 royal families battling for unification of the continent, using armies of infantry, archers, wizards, or even dragons to take over neighboring territories. I'm not sure I'd call this game very approachable, as there are an overwhelming amount of choices to make, but with a bit of extra research and patience, this could definitely be of interest to strategy game enthusiasts looking for a deep and detailed experience. We've got another deep cut for letter H with the Hybrid Front, a Japanese Mega Drive exclusive released in 1994, developed and published by Sega. This one recently got a really well done fan translation with a lot of polish and care put into it, so this gritty dystopian turn-based strategy game can finally be experienced in English. Taking place in a quite believable future where corporations control the planet's resources, the game takes you through multiple battle scenarios with lots of dialogue and plot development in between, and even during the fights as well. Its gameplay is perhaps comparable to another classic strategy game series, Daisen Ryaku, which got a couple of Mega Drive installments as well, as you take turns moving units around a map and executing various commands and attacks to deal with the situation at hand. It's a fairly lengthy campaign as well, with 26 levels in total, and plenty of units and weaponry that increase in complexity as you progress. But again, the characters and engaging story are a real highlight here. Not to mention you've got some bangin' tunes. Definitely a must-play for turn-based strategy fans. Alright, so this one is definitely a stretch to lump in with RPGs, but the letter I has pretty limited choices in this library, so I'll at least quickly touch on The Immortal, an absolutely brutal action-adventure game originally developed for the Apple IIgs, but also eventually getting ports for other computer platforms, along with console ports for the NES and Genesis. You control a wizard on a quest to save your mentor Mortimer, journeying deep into a dangerous labyrinth that will probably kill you thousands of times if you don't know what to do. This one is heavy on trial and error, and it's notoriously difficult, but has an undeniably dank and dark fantasy atmosphere. And the Genesis version also steps up the gore a notch from the NES port if you're comparing the two. And who doesn't love a nice exploding goblin head? Another fringe addition to the list here is Jantei Monogatari, a mahjong game by Telenet and Atlas. This one unfortunately does not have a translation patch available, and to make matters worse, I don't know how to play mahjong, but it still made the cut because you can level up. So on the RPG list it stays. Now it does have some nice artwork for the dialogue cutscenes and some chill tunes, but I'm afraid I don't have much else to tell you about this one here. And one more weird one here for the letter K is King Salmon, The Big Catch, a fishing game developed by Hot Bee and released in 1992. You're part of a fishing derby, competing to catch as many king salmon as you can, so you'll pilot your boat around various locations, attempting to randomly encounter fish to catch. And at times you even choose different actions, choose your own adventure style, depending on certain situations. Now to cram this into the RPG genre tackle box, you can level up your fisherman with the more fish you catch, so there you have it. This is maybe a kinda silly addition to this list, but it's surprisingly a pretty engaging game, even if you're not a big fishing game fan. And winning the tournament may prove to be quite the epic adventure. For the letter L, we have a Mega Drive RPG that was made in Taiwan, Legend of Wukong. Originally released in 1996, and it eventually got an English translated release by Super Fighter Team in 2008. It's a pretty traditional RPG in the vein of Dragon Quest, with a fairly cutesy and silly kid-friendly aesthetic, and with the story loosely based on Journey to the West, but with some time traveling and stuff. The translation seems really well done also, with plenty of lighthearted humor while interacting with the many NPCs scattered about. I didn't get too far into this one yet, as it does require a bit of the good old experience points grinding to get anywhere, but it seems like a pretty charming and cozy game if you don't mind the simplicity. And we'll make some moves into the strategy realm for a few games here with Master of Monsters. Developed by System Soft, this was first released on the Japanese PC-88 and MSX computers, but eventually got several home console ports, including some localized for North America, such as this Sega Genesis version. Basically, you control a monster summoner, and you can move your units around a hexagonal map, battling through multiple scenarios against other summoners with their own army of minions. It's fairly straightforward in its rules, but does require some trial and error to figure out the best monsters to summon for the situation. This one is pretty much pure strategy gameplay in the same vein as the previously mentioned war game Daisen Ryaku, but perhaps with an even more board game-like flavor to it. And honestly, the fantasy setting is a bit more appealing to me, and you should really at least give the soundtrack a listen in case this isn't your style of game. And up next for the letter N is Nobunaga's Ambition. And I'll admit this is not what I'd call obscure, as it's a bit of a household name in the strategy genre, but it's still a title I think many people outside of Japan tend to overlook, myself included. The original version was released in Japan in 1983 and written in BASIC, and it was one of the first computer games of its genre, a turn-based strategy war game where you aim to conquer and unify Japan. Nobunaga's Ambition games have come out on so many platforms over the years, and they still do to this day. The localized Sega Genesis port is actually based on the second game in the series, and it features 4 scenarios to pick from, and you pick a general and a territory, manage resources and your population, and attempt to take over other lands and defeat the other generals. Now I totally don't know how to play this game very well, but surely sending 60 ninjas to destroy this place is the real power move. Japan also got 2 more Nobunaga games on the Mega Drive if you're curious, or this specific entry also got released on the NES, Super Nintendo, PS1, or PC if you feel like hopping platforms. Letter O is another Koei jam, here with Operation Europe: Path to Victory, a strategy war game centered around World War II, and includes a handful of scenarios you can take part in as either the Axis or Allied forces. This one gets even drier than Nobunaga's Ambition, honestly, and it's quite less interesting visually. And for this footage, I honestly just let the demo run wild and had a nice nap. I didn't have any other options for this letter of the alphabet, and this one was really stretching out of my realm of interest, but it might be of note for hardcore historical war game fans. Up next is an independently developed RPG released in 2010, Pier Solar and the Great Architects, developed and published by Watermelon, a name you might recognize from their notorious and somewhat troubled Genesis beat-em-up Paprium. Well, without getting too deep into the drama surrounding that game's release, this was their first game, with work on it starting in 2004 and was originally intended as a Sega CD game. To avoid the costly production of releasing on multiple CD-ROM discs, it was instead shifted to a 64MB Genesis cartridge, but still potentially utilizing the audio capabilities of the Sega CD hardware if attached. All tech things aside, this is certainly a visually striking game, but it's still a pretty traditional 90s console RPG. perhaps to its detriment depending on who you ask. I haven't played too deep into this one yet, but I felt a sense of a lot of effort and care going into the aesthetics, atmosphere, and dialogue, but the actual gameplay and combat is on the tedious side, and falls a bit short in having well-developed systems and mechanics. So perhaps it's a bit unbalanced in that way, but without getting deeper into the game, I don't want to pass too much judgment on it yet. I should also mention there's an HD version on PC and modern consoles if you'd rather try that version. And for the letter Q, I had to dig deep for this always challenging letter in these sorts of alphabet-based lists, but we do at least have
Quad Challenge!
A Namco title where you role-play as an ATV. Okay, I got nothing here. Next letter, please. Alright, R is for Rings of Power. A game I'm not sure I can wholeheartedly recommend actually playing, but is certainly fascinating as a historical footnote as being a very early work from Naughty Dog in 1991, a studio who would later go on to make Crash Bandicoot, Uncharted, and most importantly, The Way of the Warrior. Now, this game almost feels like a weird port of a computer RPG, but it's really a Genesis exclusive. You play as Buck, an apprentice sorcerer in search of the titular rings of power needed to rebuild the Rod of Creation and defeat the evil Void. This one seems like it has some potential with a massive game world to explore, and maybe it gets better the further you get into it, but the cramped isometric perspective, the general ugliness of the interface, laggy controls, and an awful frame rate leave a bit to be desired. And since we covered the SNES version in my other obscure RPGs video, of course we have to show off the Genesis version of Shadowrun, which isn't a port, but instead a completely different title developed by Blue Sky Software. Set in Seattle in the 2050s, you play as Joshua on a mission to investigate and avenge your brother's death. You can pick from 3 classes, Samurai, Decker, and Gator Shaman, and start out by picking up various odd jobs to earn enough Nuyen to pay off your brother's debts and get the next clues surrounding his demise. You also earn karma points, which are basically experience points to further improve and customize your Shadowrunner and interact with various NPCs, and in general, just do a bunch of cool cyberpunk stuff. Now, this one can be a bit clunky and unintuitive at first, but with enough patience, there's a pretty cool and gritty experience once you settle in for a bit. Combat is in real time, using firearms, magic, or melee. You can eventually grow your squad by hiring some goons to follow you around and help out. Deckers can also hack into the Matrix to crash computer systems or maybe steal some data to make some money. I feel like I've only scraped the surface on this one, but it's definitely bumped in priority on my backlog at this point. For letter T, we have Togi-O, King Colossus, a Japanese exclusive Mega Drive game developed and published by Sega in 1992, and also coming from Makoto Ogino, creator of the manga Peacock King, which had a handful of video games as well, including Mystic Defender for the Genesis. Togi-O is a pretty straightforward action RPG, with some obvious Zelda influence on its sleeve, but also incorporating some experience point-based leveling and finding improved equipment along the way. Your quest begins with recovering an old sword for the wise man who raised you, and your adventures continue to escalate from there until you finally face off with the overlord of all evil in the world. No big deal. Togi-O honestly doesn't really bring much innovation to the genre, but it's still a really solid and fun time, and it fortunately has had an English fan translation made for it. It's definitely worth a look for fans of Zelda or Ys. Koei is back on the menu one more time today with Uncharted Waters, a strategy sim RPG hybrid focused on nautical exploration during the Age of Discovery. You play as Leon Franco, a noble from Portugal seeking to restore his family name to glory through sea trading, investing in foreign ports, or perhaps even battling other merchants and pirates. This was originally released on PC 88 and has seen numerous ports for home consoles and sequels, including New Horizons, which also saw a localized release for the Sega Genesis. And honestly, I still haven't put in the time to really figure out how to survive any voyage at sea, regardless of the version, but there's probably a lot of depth here for fans of resource management and perilous exploration on the open ocean. V is for Vixen 357, a Japanese exclusive turn-based strategy RPG for the Mega Drive released in 1992, and luckily it has a well-polished English fan translation. It takes place in a future full of giant anime robots, putting you through multiple battle scenarios with plenty of character interaction and dialogue throughout the battles, interspersed with cutscenes to make this more story-focused than just pure tactics gameplay. And at least starting out, things are simplified greatly, as you typically only control a handful of mech pilots, while the CPU manages many units on your side and of course the enemies. Your actions are also pretty straightforward, and while sometimes it's nice to not have to think too hard, the gameplay gets a little tedious as you wait through very similar battle animations over and over again. Yeah, that's just my first impression of the first few missions. I guess I have to guess things get more interesting. And at least the presentation is quite nice, and the translated dialogue is very engaging. Definitely worth a look. Next up is Warsong, the first title in the Langrisser series, as it's better known in Japan, released there in 1991, and eventually localized as Warsong the following year. Strategy game enthusiasts probably know this series already, but sometimes the title change on this game keeps it under the radar for some folks. Like we've seen often in this type of strategy RPG, you control various squads and unit types through various scenarios to try to accomplish a specific objective for victory. It does have plenty of story embedded here too, with your main character being Prince Garrett of Baltia, battling against the Delsis Empire and the usual forces of evil, of course. This seems to have a wide variety of units and strategies that you can customize, and even the first battle is quite a spicy challenge, with tons of enemies closing in on you while you try to make your escape. Top it off with one of the best soundtracks on the console, and tactics RPG fans will be eating quite well here. Now this received numerous sequels in Japan, and maybe also check out the Langrisser 1 and 2 remake bundle with an English localization for PC, Switch, and PlayStation. X is often a tricky letter for these alphabetic exercises, but I actually do have one here for you guys if I can try to pronounce it, with Shin Qigai Wangzi, another RPG from Taiwan first released in 1996, and like The Legend of Wukong previously mentioned, it got an English translation and physical release from Super Fighter Team in 2006, under the title Beggar Prince. Also like Wukong, this is a quite traditionally styled RPG in the vein of Dragon Quest, with a very light-hearted vibe and somewhat childish dialogue. You play as a bratty prince who bumps into a beggar who looks exactly like him and thinks it would be fun to trade places with him for a day. Other sinister machinations at play keep him from re-entering the castle, and his quest to prove his identity begins. Gameplay-wise, there isn't much new ground being broken here. This even feels more like an old 8-bit RPG if I'm being honest. And if we're comparing it to Wukong again, this one feels a bit more unpolished. The battle system also takes some getting used to. While you have the usual fight, magic, item commands, and whatnot, you can do multiple actions in a row until your meter runs out, which seems fine, but the same goes for the enemies, so you can often just get hammered by multiple attacks without being able to do much about it. Maybe I misunderstood something there, but it can make for a slow start as you venture out of the town for the first time. This is certainly not the cream of the crop here, but maybe worth a try for something easygoing. Now this series is hardly obscure or overlooked, but it's all I got for the letter Y. It's Ys 3, with the 1991 Genesis version being one of many different ports of the third entry in one of Falcom's flagship franchises. Now this one does set itself apart from the first two games in that it shifted to a side-scrolling action platformer format instead of bump combat, but it still retains plenty of the RPG elements and systems from prior games. This one takes place 3 years after the events of the previous game, and Adol and Dogi return to Dogi's hometown, Redmont, and naturally get entangled into adventures as soon as they arrive, with a mission to rescue the mayor from the nearby monster-infested mine. So personally, I do have a soft spot for this game, as the Super Nintendo version was the first Ys game I had played, and it was actually one of the first Super Nintendo games I ever played. I will admit, it can be a bit rough getting into this one, as you really need to grind experience and gold for a while right away, as you'll quickly find that Adol's lack of invincibility frames can explode your health bar pretty fast if your stats aren't up to par for the next enemy that crosses your path. But with patience and making sure to save your game often, I think it's a great challenge well worth your time. Now there are a lot of versions of this, remakes too if you count Oath of Felghana, but if there is any reason to play the Genesis version, the soundtrack absolutely slaps on the YM2612, so at least buy some Harb and kick back to some hot jams. And to close things out here for the letter Z, our options are limited, but there is a strategy game called Zan Yasha Enbukyoku, developed by Wolf Team, ported from Japanese PCs to the Mega Drive in 1991. And it's the second game in their Zan series, and it's the first Zan game for a home console. It's unfortunately lacking any sort of translation patch, but it appears to be a pretty straightforward looking turn-based strategy sim pitting Yaksha warriors against demons. And that's my list for today. Hopefully it uncovered a few new ones for you to check out sometime. I know I found a few that I hope to give a full run through of someday. Now if you have any other Genesis RPG or strategy game recommendations, lay them on me in the comments. And as always, thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time.